All right. Welcome, everyone. I am Tom Fox, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today with my good friends and colleagues, Michael Volkov and Sam Silverstein. We wanted to visit with you about the Boeing Monitorship and why we think culture will be the key to any successful monitorship. As I said, I'm joined by Mike Volkov from the Volkov Law Group, and here are our great pictures. And then Sam Silverstein, of course, the accountability guru. With that, Mike, I'm going to pitch it over to you and ask you to set the stage of where we are now with the filed plea agreement.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending upon what time zone you're in. It's great to be here. Any opportunity to work with Sam and with Tom is actually just a great pleasure. Always a learning experience for me. So let's talk about the Boeing, the sort of current phase of litigation that's going on. And it's a tortured sort of path from 2021 on. But the current state of affairs is DOJ has just recently filed a proposed plea agreement with Boeing. And this was filed with the district court in Dallas, Texas, and the judge is Reed O'Connor. And the reason it was filed there is because the original deferred prosecution agreement, which was in 2021, resulting from the 737 MAX safety scandal, was filed there in Dallas, Texas. And now this plea agreement involves what would happen under this basically is Boeing is agreeing to plead guilty to a one count information for conspiracy to commit fraud against the FAA and the airplane evaluation group. And that's the group that's required to sort of, they give the certification ultimately to any manufacturer with regard to the air or the ability of the airplane to fly. And for each individual airplane, there is an evaluation group and a process that has gone. Now, in exchange for this guilty plea, instead of going to trial or anything like that, basically Boeing is going to pay $243 million as a fine. And this was set earlier in the original deferred prosecution agreement in 2021. Under the plea agreement, they are going to pay $243 million. Now, the real wrinkle to the whole issue here is that we have families of victims who are participating as the victims' rights under their statutory victims' rights and participating in this procedure, and they are seeking restitution. And under the plea agreement for the loss of their over 380 individuals in two plane crashes that occurred, uh, under the plea agreement, the court will determine if any restitution should be awarded to the families of victims. In addition to that, and the reason that we're here really to talk mainly is our appointment of an independent compliance monitor. And I want to talk a little bit more about that because there's some interesting wrinkles with regard to this. Now, what is important about this is that there is now a scheduling order that is in place. And this scheduling order, in other words, DOJ starts this off with the filing of the plea agreement. The victims of the families and their attorneys, and there's several attorneys and several groups of families that are involved, are able to file their comments and their views with regard to the plea agreement. And you can rest assured that they're not happy with the plea agreement. And then the court will issue a decision and then also determine whether or not to take the plea. And the plea is also structured in a way that it's under Rule 11 of the criminal procedures. And it's structured in a way that it's a take it or leave it type of deal for the court. Okay, so let's go on, Tom, and sort of get into this a little bit more in terms of the court proceedings. The objections of the families of the victims from the Lion Air Flight 610 and then the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 is number one, they don't like they think the penalty is too low. They also believe that Boeing should acknowledge their direct responsibility for the death of family members, and that the court should be involved in the selection and oversight of the independent compliance monitor. And they also raised an interesting issue in my mind. They said that by this deal, there's almost an implicit exoneration of those senior board members or senior executives who may have been responsible for the safety lapses that resulted in the death of the passengers. The district court had previously ruled that DOJ did not have the DOJ had violated what's called the Criminal Victims' Rights Act and or Civil Victims' Rights Act, and that had violated, but they didn't have much of a remedy. But this issue is going to go up again on appeal, but we will expect to see some kind of hearings that are involved in Dallas with the victims' families. Okay, let's go now. Basically, the breach that they have filed for, and when you read the facts, it's really kind of disturbing about the nature of the violations that occurred here. And the violations, basically, the breach occurred because what DOJ is saying is that the ethics and compliance program failed to integrate anti-fraud compliance controls into Boeing's quality and safety operations. And in particular, they cited the failure of the quality and safety procedures to include anti-fraud controls. And number one, the need to address Boeing's culture and the lack of a culture of compliance and ethics. And then in particular, they went into what is called out of sequence work, where that is documented, where you may have, let's say, a manufacturing line, and things are done out of sequence. That is usually documented because there are usually audits that are required on the safety and double checks to make sure things are still safe. The records were not being kept completely, and stamping issues in the build records. They literally stamp on parts and they literally stamp on paperwork associated the process by which the verification is done, that the quality and the safety standards have been met. And interestingly enough, there were serious lapses in the safety records. And I think it's important for our discussion later on that what the common concern that was uncovered and root cause, if you want to say, is that many employees felt that what was important was that they were under pressure to meet productivity and timing and financial profitability standards more so than safety and quality. And yeah, it's important. Okay. And let's talk a minute about we can go on to the next slide, Tom, the independent compliance monitor. And here's where there's some issues that we need to sort of focus a little bit more on. It's a 3-year term, which is not unusual for an independent compliance monitor. One of the interesting provisions is that DOJ and Boeing, in their agreement, exclude from the district court's jurisdiction. And the district court the judge would have jurisdiction over any probationary term, and they still have probationary supervision, but they are excluding from it any role that the court could have in the oversight of the independent compliance monitor. This is an unusual provision. It's not normally included. And the reason I think that it's included is because there was some controversy years ago when Carnival Cruise Lines, in an environmental crime case, when the judge did have supervision over the probationary term of the compliance monitor, and there were issues that the judge was concerned about and exercised jurisdiction and put everybody on notice about a bunch of issues that the judge had because there was recurring violations. So I think DOJ and Boeing are trying to exclude this kind of oversight from the district court's jurisdiction. I think this is a really troublesome issue. I don't know if the judge is going to accept that. But to me, it seems like an issue that a court should have jurisdiction over in terms of probation, because part of probation is to make sure that there is remediation. And the best way to make sure that there's proper remediation is for the judge to make that determination. Boeing is also required to invest $455 million in compliance, quality and safety programs, which is supposed to be an increase of 75% above their prior budget. And the way the process is going to work, DOJ is going to put up or monitor candidates. They will select 6 candidates from the submissions. And then Boeing has the right to remove one of the six candidates. Don't ask me why or why they negotiated for that. And then DOJ will make a selection from the five candidates. Once they select that individual or that monitor or team, it'll be a team given the size of the project. DOJ then files under seal with the court the notification of its selection. So the families won't know. Apparently, nobody will know except for the company and the monitor. So that kind of sets the stage. But Tom, I wanted to ask you sort of your thoughts on going back even on some of the concerns you may have and what you see in terms of the compliance monitor process and the selection.
So, Mike, the process is, I want to say, the same but unique. We have seen this monitor process utilized in other where the Department of Justice will solicit proposals from various entities, companies, and consultants that would be involved in the monitor. But here we have specific and explicit lack of transparency or opaqueness. If sunshine as the light of day is the best disinfectant, we do not have that here. It starts with the monitor, the court not having jurisdiction over the monitor. The court cannot determine whether the successful or unsuccessful completion of the monitorship in the context of the probation agreement. The monitor itself, the selected monitor, will be filed under seal with the court. I think that's unprecedented. While the monitorships are not generally public information, everyone sort of knows who the monitors are for large cases, Siemens, Volkswagen, you name the case where we had monitorships. Those monitors were well known and were celebrated for the work they did. So that's unusual with the process itself. The second part, and I know Sam is going to go into this when we get to culture, but typically a compliance monitor will focus on compliance. And obviously that's the 10 hallmarks or the hallmarks of an effective compliance program: policies, procedures, internal controls, tone at the top, training, incentives, third parties, etc. We have a broader remit for the monitor now. You specifically, Mike, called out anti-fraud, safety, QA/QC issues. Those are not things we've seen a monitor explicitly be required, a compliance monitor explicitly be required to talk about. So I think that is unusual. And the types of monitorships we have seen in the past involve people in the compliance industry, if I can call it that, who are very familiar with compliance and can do compliance. Here, I think we have a much broader remit. And once again, I know Sam is going to take us through that when we get there. My concerns are that the monitor as structured currently will not be able to, the compliance monitor will not be able to really get at the issues involved here that you went through on the slide about QA/QC, workers reporting, trust culture, health and safety, a variety of issues that we have seen lead to some of the problems from this round and leading to this plea agreement. And I think a much broader approach needs to be taken with the monitorship. I'm very concerned with the lack of transparency. The court having no role in this also seems troubling. We're not going to really talk about it in this webinar, but the victims, families of the victims are going to be able to meet with the board of directors of Boeing and offer their suggestions, but there's no requirement that Boeing accept those suggestions. And there's really no mechanism for anything other than, I would say, meet and confer, but I'm not sure Boeing will even confer. They may listen. A lot of very unique provisions in this plea agreement, but the court is really cut out of this. And whether the court can or will accept that, obviously, is an open question that we will all wait to see how the court rules. But I've advocated for a much broader monitorship with multiple subspecialty monitors because I think it is in everyone's interest, certainly in the victim's family, certainly the Department of Justice, certainly the stakeholders at Boeing, the Boeing board, the customers of Boeing who buy planes, and everyone who flies a Boeing plane has an interest in Boeing remediating itself and getting back to being the best airplane manufacturer in the world. And that's where we need to go with this. So those are some of my immediate concerns.
No, I hear you on that, Tom, and I think those are all. I'm worried about the lack of transparency, but in particular, and that the victims' families are just going to be excluded again from this process in one way or another. What I don't want to see is a window dressing type of solution. But that sets us up now, Sam. I mean, and we hate to start it off by sort of giving you the ball on something that is just, it really is the most challenging question, which is how do we even start to tackle this issue of culture when the sort of record is replete with instances of whistleblowers being either ignored, retaliated against, or people who raised quality concerns within the company on the line who were raising serious concerns, even all the way up to some managers who then were retaliated against and told to keep their mouth shut or fired or whatever. And the common concern that everybody reported, which was that everything was driven by money and productivity and financial bottom line. And how can you have no concern about quality and safety?
It's interesting. They want to designate an independent compliance monitor, and the reality is it's not about compliance, it's about culture. And that's where the issue is. When you're looking at a compliance monitor, basically you're measuring outflows. The reality is you need to look at the inflow. What's creating the environment that's causing the outflows to happen? It'd be like looking at a polluted stream. You go out to the water, you look at the stream, oh my gosh, there's all sorts of pollutants in it. So what do? You put a filter in down there, you try to clean it up down. No, you go upstream. You go to the source, you go to the headwaters, you look at what is the cause of the problem. That's where the attention needs to be turned. And that's what culture is. Everything is going to flow from the culture at Boeing. And you basically just painted the picture. They've created a culture of keep your mouth shut. They've created a culture of that's going to cost money. It's going to hurt the bottom line. We'll just take that shortcut or take our chance. This is the culture they've created, much different than the culture decades ago, say at McDonnell Douglas, where quality meant everything. And if there was a problem, you fixed it, period. So the reality is that we don't need a compliance monitor. We need a culture monitor. Or we need a compliance monitor that certainly understands culture or has a culture expert on the team, because that's where they will ultimately fix the issue.
Can I ask you guys a question, both of you, Sam and Tom? It's an interesting thought to have a member of the team or a part of the team of the compliance monitorship designated solely on culture. And then we get into the harder issues of defining your culture. How do you measure a culture? How do you monitor a culture? And what do you do to intervene when you see culture problems? And to me, everybody always says culture starts at the top and your new CEO is going to create a culture. But to me, there's got to be, to me, you can't just walk in and say, hey, we got a new culture without some acknowledgement and some responsibility, or I think you used the word, Sam, accountability of some sort. What happened? Why did it happen? And what are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And it seems to me like you gain credibility not by bringing in a new leader who says we're going to be different. There has to be some acknowledgement somehow.
Of course, there has to be acknowledgement. They've acknowledged that there's a problem. They just haven't acknowledged that they're the cause of the problem. So
Right.
I'm not going to disagree with you there at all. The reality is that, though, it's not just the CEO, it's the board. The culture stems from the top, and everyone tends to look at the CEO. In every organization we've ever worked with that we've either helped design their culture, transform their culture, or sustain their culture, it always flowed from the top. If the CEO wasn't aligned with the stated culture, then it wasn't their culture. But the reality is that this goes back to the board level. The board has to be on board with the culture. If the board isn't mandating that this is the kind of culture that we want, then they might not even hire the right CEO, because you always hire to the culture and fire from the culture. Anyone you bring into your organization needs to be aligned with the culture. So normally you would have a strong CEO, and that would get the board on board with where this culture needs to be. But in this situation, if the board isn't aligned and the CEO aren't aligned, then they'll never be able to create the culture that they want to create. But if they are aligned, then they can create that culture. And where that culture starts is by designing the culture. You design a culture, in essence, you define your culture, you model your culture, you teach your culture, you protect the culture, and you celebrate the culture. And the first thing you do is that you define the culture through the values. You have to know what the values are. And Tom, if you'd advance to the next slide for us, please. It's all about the values. Now, what are the values at Boeing? The values of Boeing are, if you keep quiet, we'll make more money. We value the short-term profits of keeping quiet. That's their value. Now, someone from Boeing might say, or a leader might say, no, that's not our value. It doesn't say that anywhere in the value sheet. But, my dad taught me years ago, actions speak louder than words. So your values are not what's on a piece of paper. Your values are what your actions tell us they are. And the actions at Boeing say that they value silence, and that they value staying in line, and that they don't value safety. They don't value doing it the right way. They don't value compliance. That's what their actions say. So, if you have a monitor coming in under a 3-year program, and we have 3 years to turn this culture around, we have to start by defining the culture. We start it with the values. We start by getting everyone in the room. We start by having a cross section of the organization. This isn't a C-suite exercise. I want somebody that's driving rivets on the production floor, part of the conversation, or what are the values here? And I want to hear people within the organization articulate how they see quality, how they see communication, how they see respect, how they see these elements of what is a great job. Because then we create a set of values that define the culture. Now, that's just where it starts. We give what we get. And in essence, what that says is, when leadership really cares about their people, and that's what accountability is. It's accountability to their people and for their people. Accountability is not about getting stuff done. That's responsibility. You're responsible for things. You're accountable to people. But when I know when my leader has my back, when I know that my leader is there for me, when I know that my leader is living the values, when I know that my leader is telling the truth, when I know that my leader values fixing a problem rather than covering it up, then I'm going to respond the same way. I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to fix the value. I'm going to be able to communicate. And you know what? I'm going to be there for my leader because I know that the leadership is there for me. This is a whole departure in the way of thinking that's been present at Boeing, but that's what needs to happen. And that's what the independent compliance monitor needs to be involved in. That's going upstream. That's the headwaters. That's starting to fix the problem at its origin. Now, this isn't overnight. It's going to take some time, but we have to start by defining the culture. The next thing we do is we model the culture, and then we teach the culture. The values should always be part of the conversation. The values are always part of the conversation. And so people are talking about the values and making decisions based on the values. When someone says, what do we do in this situation? The answer should be, what do our values tell us? Our values talk about integrity and doing what's right. Okay, so what does that mean? The right thing to do is to remake this. Okay, then the decision is made. You don't even need me to make that decision. Your decision needs to align with the values. So that's that. And then we need to start telling stories from our successes. We need stories that align, that show the values in action. So these stories start becoming lore throughout the organization because you know what? The culture is so bad at Boeing, it's going to take 3 years to make a significant dent. But when you hear a story about, oh, so and so out at the plant in Seattle found this mistake and immediately notified the leader on the team, and they got back with the engineer. And actually, what they did is they redesigned the way these two pieces come together. And now they're like 3 times stronger than ever before. And Bill or Mary or whoever did this amazing job. Now, when that story gets out, people start to believe it's possible. And when they start to believe it's possible, then they want to step up and because they're buying in and they want to participate at that level and they want to find things that can be improved on. And now it becomes almost a competition who can do it better rather than who can get away with more. And that's really what it's all about. These success stories are so important in taking the culture and teaching it to everyone in the organization. But
Sam, let me get your response to two incidents or two sort of experiences I've had, and I think it underscores a little bit of the point you just made, or points you just made. The first was I was working with a company in compliance, and the CEO would stand at an all employee meeting, stood up and said to the entire workforce, I want to hear from you. If you've got a problem, I've got a problem. And I want to hear from you. And we want to address the problem, whatever problem you may see. And their call center or their reporting line skyrocketed right after that. And this CEO would walk the halls and basically thank people for bringing up things to him, or the CEO would say, please report this to your supervisor. We will get this taken care of. And that hands-on demonstration, you say when words are cheap, actions are harder, was really significant in terms of resonating with the employees. And let me give you one other story that occurred. And this is true at BP at one point. There was a whistleblower who reported anonymously that a leak was going to occur and a huge disruption on the Alaska slopes with regard to pipes, that something was going to burst. And he was an engineer and he was saying, look, go look at this. It's going to be a calamity. They went out and they looked at it and they couldn't find what he was talking about. They wrote back to him. Then the guy gave him more information. BP went back out there. And then what happened was they found it and they avoided a huge just disaster on the slopes.
sure.
And so they approached the anonymous whistleblower and said, would you please come out? We want to celebrate you. We want to celebrate what you did. And at first the whistleblower wouldn't come out, but he agreed to come out and disclose and his identity. And you know what? The CEO was there and they had a celebration of this individual and to thank this individual for coming forward. And I noticed in your words, you have to celebrate your culture. In other words, acknowledge it, but then do something big around it. But I wanted to give you those two stories because I think that fits into just what you were talking about.
Well, thanks, Mike. And I appreciate that. And I agree with you. The thing is, why did the person feel like they couldn't come forward through normal channels? Why did they have to be anonymous? So I'm questioning. So was that a glitch in their culture? Was that because maybe this individual worked for another company like Boeing and was taught that you just don't say those things? Who knows? But here you have a situation that's absolutely fantastic because the leader didn't just go out and fix the problem. The leader convinced the individual to come forward publicly so that this could be one of these stories. This is an example of how we do it here. We share when we see a problem. And because you know what? I may come to you and say, I think there's a problem. You may go out there and there isn't a problem. I could be wrong. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. And so it's this open, honest communication, but it's through constant celebrating. It's through these stories that will reinforce that. culture has to be reinforced over and over again for those two reasons. One, the culture in the organization may, under previous leadership, been caustic. It may be something that wasn't ideal. Or when you're bringing in people into the organizations that we've seen that have amazing cultures, a lot of times new employees just don't believe that it can be that. You mean around here you could go to the CEO with a problem? You mean around here you can point out something that you can fix it if it's going to cause a problem, and you don't have to worry that it's going to cost more than what we made on the project in the first. All of this, yeah, they don't believe this stuff. So I love that story for that reason. One thing I want to do, and I want to bring this part home, is protecting the culture, and this is really key to protect the culture. To protect the culture, couple of things. You need to, first of all, you need to hire slow and fire fast. You need to hire people that align with the culture. And if people aren't living the culture, you need to get rid of them. So if you have people at different levels of the organization that are telling others to shut up, then you know what? You need to get rid of them. They're not on board, they're out. And that's also not just protects the culture, but it sends the message, hey, this isn't how we're going to do it around here. This isn't how we're going to do it around here. And then after you work feverishly, which never ends protecting the culture, then you celebrate it. So at the bottom line is it's all about mindset. It's all about mindset. What do you believe? What do you believe? What do you believe is the right thing to do? Is the right thing to do to fix it again, fix it a third time, regardless of cost? Or is the right thing to get it out the door and make sure that our profits are up for our stakeholders this quarter? Because that's what it comes down to. The culture, the actions that we see in any organization, be it Boeing or any organization, they shout out what we believe and they tell the marketplace. And Lindsay put something in the comments about this, about the brand. Yeah, what you believe is what defines your brand, and it tells the marketplace whether or not you should support this organization, whether you should give them your business, whether you should consider going to work there. All of that's going to come out of the mindset of leadership. And as soon as you allow something to happen on your premises that doesn't align with the mindset, and it's not fixed, and you allow that person to stay, and it happens again, you no longer believe what you said you believe. You no longer have the values that you said you had. And so that's why we start with defining the culture. We model the culture. We teach the culture. We protect the culture. And then we celebrate the success of the culture, which a great, high performance, sustainable culture will deliver more on the bottom line over time than any other culture. It may not maximize it this quarter, but over time, it'll take that organization to greater heights.
Hey, Sam, I want to sort of talk about that last point because to me, it's a board worthy note, which is, and for some reason, this just seems like a profound grasp of the obvious, but for whatever reason, it's harder to get this in the heads of business leaders, which is the research consistently shows, and you just mentioned it, that high performing culture companies over the long run make more money than moderate or low performing culture companies. And the point is, and I guess they call it sort of the culture premium that companies can, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed profitability, but you'll make more money than you would otherwise make. And what I don't understand is if it's an investment, if you want to look at your most important intangible asset, it's your reputation. And why is it not just a direct correlation? If we invest in our culture, we perform better financially. Here within Boeing, it seemed as if we are safe, if we make sure, if we take our time to produce something that's high quality and safe, and we slow down our quote unquote short term profits or short term revenues, that somehow is not part of our culture. And that is the point that you want to talk about board members who should understand this. You had a pretty sophisticated board, but why is there not that connection made more often in the board members or the senior executives' minds?
Yeah, the answer to that question is pretty simple. Why are there scammers out there that work all day at illegal jobs trying to take advantage of people instead of working all day at honest jobs?
Right.
Um, I have no freaking idea.
Sam, we've had a question come in from Lindsay. Lindsay, do you have a question for Sam or Mike?
No, I was just kinda saying I live in St. Louis, so I think that I just feel for a lot of my friends, for everybody on this call, even, like, people that work for Boeing. I feel like as soon as you say that and you're somewhere and everyone's so I think they have a long way to go, but it's definitely on the mind of me often, so I just wanted to say that.
And
Thanks,
Sam, that
Lindsay. And
really
you know what that hold on just one second, Tom. And that just points out the impact of culture is not just on the employees, but also on the community. And Lindsay made that comment in the notes as well, in the comments. Yeah, think about it. You want to hire and retain the best people, you have to have the best culture. Why would I go to work someplace that no one's going to listen to me? I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead now. You were about to ask something.
yeah, that really leads to a question I wanted to pose to you, Sam. So this following language comes directly from the proposed plea agreement, and it says, quote, "The company will create and foster a culture of ethics and compliance with the law in their day-to-day operations at all levels of the company," end quote. I wanted to use that to introduce the topic of trust. And you mentioned in your opening remarks, this will be a 3-year process. How on earth can you start that process of finding out where the employees are, where is trust, where are the issues of your values? Do you simply come in and say, these are going to be the values going forward? Or do you sit down and try to assess where people are?
That's a great question, Tom. Is if Mike said, "Sam, why don't you come over for dinner tonight?" And I go, "Wow, I appreciate that. How do I get to your house?" Mike's gonna ask me a question. He's gonna say, "Where are you coming from?" Because if he doesn't know where I'm coming from, how can he tell me how to get to his house? So that's the whole purpose behind the culture audit is the first thing we need to know is where we're coming from, not anecdotally. We need data. We need real numbers. Where's our culture? Not just engagement. Anyone can measure engagement. Where's accountability? Where's safety? Emotional safety. I'm guessing emotional safety at Boeing is pretty low, but I want to know what the numbers are. Where's the communication? Where's the quality of leadership? There's 15 areas that we measure because we need to know where you are. Because once we know where you are, and we know where you want to be, then it's about creating a strategy that's going to allow us to get there. So until you know where you are, you can't create the strategy, the directions to get to where you want to go. Now, implementation is really key. And that's where leadership at all levels have to buy in. And if they don't buy in, then they need to buy out. And you know what I mean by that. But then we have this independent compliance monitor. How do you monitor the culture? I don't want to do it anecdotally. I want numbers. I want to constantly be measuring the culture and getting real data, real numbers, and seeing where the improvement is coming and where it's not. And then based on that data, refine the strategy or refine the implementation. Because a great strategy that's not implemented well isn't going to give you the results you're looking.
So can this be done in 3 years, Sam?
The question would be, what's the definition of this? Will their culture be unbelievable at the end of a 3-year period? Their culture could be really good. First of all, this is a process that never stops. Um, Leadership it would be all hands on deck. It'd be exactly what Mike talked about. The CEO should be on the floor. I'm going to say 24/7. We know that's not realistic, but senior leadership needs to be seen, constantly in conversations. They need to know what's going on. If you don't know that something's happening at mid-level leadership, then you're not a qualified senior level leader. And so they need to be out there. Can this be done in 3 years? I think in 3 years, you can have a totally different looking organization. But at the end of the 3 years, you better be willing to double down and re-up and keep moving forward, because we want to make it to 5. We want to make it to 6. We want this permanent. And it's an ongoing effort, Tom.
So we've had a question come in, and I'm going to start off by pitching it to you, Sam, and then Mike, ask you to weigh in as well. And here's the question slash comment from Andy. It seems as though a compliance monitor has to have some teeth and involvement in the safety and quality meetings, as well as the board committees, aerospace safety committee, compensation committee, and relevant special committees of the board. Sam, how would you address the board around culture? Would you go into this sort of specificity?
Well, heck yeah. Here's the situation. We talk about a monitor, and Mike even used the term a team of monitors. This isn't a 1-person, 2-person, 5-person. There needs to be a significant team spread throughout the organization, but it needs to be set up to where these are your allies. These people are here to help you. They're not here to accost you. They're not here to slap your wrist. And do I see you as a friend or do I see you as a foe? But absolutely, if they're not involved, if someone's not involved in these meetings, how do you know that the right conversations are being held in these meetings? And since the track record is so poor, we have to assume that there's failure at every level, at every committee, in every meeting, and that needs to be fixed. So it needs to be some form of compliance monitor. Now, Boeing could say, compliance monitor, that's just not enough. We want those compliance monitors and we want more. We're going to put a team of internal compliance monitors on our payroll, and they're going to connect back with the DOJ appointed compliance monitors. So we improve the communication, so we reach all levels, and so we do it more expeditiously so that, yeah, it happens in 3 years. So I think Andy's idea is right on target.
Mike, I want to ask you, I did not see anything in the plea agreement, which would indicate to me that the monitor would have access to the board, would be able to develop the board along the lines of what the DOJ said that the company will create and foster a culture of ethics and compliance. Is that a concern for you at this point, or do you think that the monitor has or will have the authority to get the board in shape?
That's a good point, Tom. And I also, let me say, Andy's point was really well taken, that this is a monitor that cannot just operate in the ethics and compliance space. It has to operate everywhere. But going back to the relationship with the board, there's always this tension. And we were part of the BP board, BP monitorship that occurred after the Deepwater Horizon issue. And there was a big struggle in the sense of the company tends to try to push the monitor out of the boardroom, even away from the CEO, and says, okay, now you go just work on all the systems below this. And what I think the value and the importance of this discussion we're having is that what Sam and you are positing is that without this access, without a complete sort of soup to nuts approach from the top to the bottom, this is doomed to fail without the access to the board. What has Sam said 5 times, at least 5 times here? That it starts with the board. Not even the CEO, Sam, you're saying it starts with the board. And if the monitor isn't getting access to the board, if the monitor doesn't have the ability to train the board or say to the board, let's talk about how we're going to get this done, what are we saying then about what a culture is in a company? Who's responsible for the culture? Sam's saying it's the board. And you know what? He's right on target with that, because this board sent a message. It sent a message by its failure to ever set up a safety committee, by its failure to address safety issues, and by its prioritizing short-term financial results over safety and quality. We know that's true. So remediation to me means you start from the top. This and we all say, and I'm very repetitive on this point, your culture is your best control in your company. It is your most effective control. It protects your most valuable intangible asset, which is your reputation and your mission, the ability of you to exercise and build on the trust that you have with your employees. And let's just take a step back for a second. When a whistleblower came forward in Boeing, they were vilified. They were told to shut up. And then they were fired as an example of what you do. So, what is the message that's sent then? And they had no mechanism, by the way. If you look back in the history of Boeing, they had no mechanism for safety reports or whistleblower reports to be reported to the board. Every company that I work with, they at least will have the chief compliance officer says, here's where we are in complaints. Here's what complaints have come in. Here are the types, and here are the most significant ones so that the board knows it. The board at Boeing never heard those reports. Never. So you want to start with, let's say the board needs to get involved in culture. Without that access, Tom, I'm sorry, you're doomed to fail without that access. And I think it's going to be an issue up front when this monitor gets started as to where are the boundaries in terms of their operation.
Mike, I'd like to maybe ask you, do you see a role for the court in this process?
And that to me is a really critical issue because the agreement right now says that the court will not have a role. In other words, the court is being told this by DOJ: trust us. If we see a violation, we'll report it to you and then we'll come to you, judge. But until then, we will oversee the monitor, being DOJ, and court, you don't have a role here. And I think that's wrong because I don't think, look, the point is the DOJ had 3 years under this DPA that started in 2021. What happened during those 3 years? How did these breaches occur? What kind of oversight was DOJ performing? And why did this occur? It clearly didn't work because we have breaches. And now that's when the court has a role to step in and remediate and oversee the probation and make sure that things are being done properly. Because it didn't work already. And Sam is talking about a complete overhaul of a company's culture. That cannot be done simply by DOJ saying, if you don't do this right, we're going to go to the judge. It hasn't worked up to now. So now what is going to happen? So I see this as a critical issue, and I'm hoping that the court will say to DOJ and to Boeing, I'm not going to approve this deal unless I've got a seat at the table here. And frankly, I think he's obligated to do that.
Mike, what about the victims' families? Can the monitor help address some of the concerns that we have heard from the families of the victims?
I absolutely believe that the monitor has to do this because, and look, what the court wrote afterwards was after the hearing, the court wrote that you cannot, if you listen and hear the victims' families, you cannot help be overwhelmed in terms of grief, in terms of what harm they all suffered. I don't know the right answer to this, but I do know if we go back to Sam's word on accountability, the one thing that you cannot have at a company is a company that ignores the consequences of its actions. And here, when so many innocent people were killed that trusted the system, that trusted the plane that they got on to fly safely, there has to be something, some acknowledgement, some accountability. And I think that the victims have raised a lot of legitimate concerns. I'm not saying that I would take every one of their suggestions, but they have certainly raised concerns that have to be addressed in some. And I think the monitor has to do that. And frankly, the meet and confer requirement, you know what? It's kind of like begging the board to be sensitive, to be human. If you don't, when you listen to the families, if all of us sat there in that courtroom and didn't cry, we wouldn't be human. We wouldn't be human. And the board has to become human. And I don't know how you teach that. I trust Sam and I trust his approach and I trust his view because I think trust and integrity means that there has to be empathy as well within an organization.
So, Sam, I want to pitch to you and ask you to sort of wrap us up, but I'm going to lead into that with saying I think this is the most significant and important monitorship the Department of Justice has engaged in. And I think they're absolutely right to focus on culture. Maybe your final thoughts on how can we get there together?
I feel like the DOJ is close, and I just don't want to see them fumble it right here at the goal line and sign off on a deal that doesn't give them the authority that they need to get the job done. At the same time, I don't want to see an independent compliance monitor who's got his ego in the wrong place and makes it about him. It's not about him. It's not about the Department of Justice. It's not even about Boeing, really. It's about us. It's about everyone that's going to take a seat on an airplane. And it's about the United States and our national security and viability in having a manufacturer that's manufacturing aircraft that can defend our sovereignty. There's a lot at stake here. I go back. I sat in a board meeting with an organization one time. They were reviewing the strategic plan at the board level. There were 9 points to the strategic plan. Point number one was protect and defend the culture. If the compliance monitor has the right authority, if the board is all in, they can transform Boeing into an amazing organization. But that's what they have to believe. And if they see the compliance monitor as a team member and they get together and say, let's tackle this, we can put a man on the moon. Can't we fix the culture of one organization? You bet we can.
I want to just mention that if you'd like a free consultation or behind the scenes look at the culture audit, this is our email address and way to do so. We'd love to talk to you, Sam and myself. Here is a little more information on the culture audit. Sam, you want to walk us through this quickly?
And if they go to the cultureaudit.com, then the link, you might, if that link can be put in the chat, that'd be great too. In essence, what we do is we measure, analyze, and create a situation where leaders can then act. So what you can see on the right-hand side here, we measure ethics, organizational beliefs and values, focus, clarity of mission, whether or not people are valued, the quality of decisions, employee engagement. We measure accountability, speed of implementation, which is important, trust, communication, innovation and change, safety, strength of leadership, and actually something that's not listed there, we even measure stress in the workplace. So all this is measured, but it's not just reported on where it's at. It's how do we attack each situation? Anything that can be that we can measure, we can improve. What are the next steps to improve on each of these areas? And that's all within the report. So would love to use the link, have a conversation with Tom and I, and look at your organization to see how you can use this fantastic tool to get insights on what's going on in your culture and what are the next steps you can take to make your culture absolutely fantastic.
So with it, this is our contact information once again. And Sam said we'd love to talk with you about this. I think Sam just put the link in for anyone who's attended this webinar. We will provide the slide deck. We're also going to have a graphic for you that will follow Sam's remarks and outline about moving forward on a major culture remediation project and how you can think through that as a process. So we hope that that will be of value to you as well. Obviously, Mike and Sam and I have thought a lot about this with the DOJ filing the plea agreement. It's really given us all a lot to think about. And just from the comments of people, I mean, Lindsay, you're spot on. We all have a stake in this. And if you're from St. Louis and your friends or your colleagues or people who work at Boeing are sheepishly not willing to say that right now, I mean, that's something that all of us feel and all of us have a stake in this. So I hope the Department of Justice will really take some of these concepts to heart and I know the court will, and I know Mike, the victims' families are certainly going to raise these concerns. Do you guys want to have really any final thoughts?
No, thanks everybody. Thanks for attending. Sam, it's been a pleasure. Tom, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Michael, for being here with us and the expertise you shared. And thank you, everyone, for participating. When you get those emails, be sure and share the links with some other people so that they can review the video as well.
All right, we are at 12:59, so we're going to give you a minute back. Thanks so much for attending, and we look forward to visiting with you again.